Children's prayers and just sit and listen to it all day, and the simplicity. It's a little warmer today, so we have to finish early, right, Jim? No. Every time I get up, somebody asks, where's the pulpit? And I have to tell the story because I have a fear of pulpit. And this is how the story goes. The year is 1992. I applied for Zaoksky Seminary. It's in Russia, about 80 miles from Moscow. And this is the first time I kind of went out for something adventurous that way. And we came, so there were about 50 spots available. This was fairly new thing. The Iron Curtain came down. The Soviet Union fell apart in 91, just a year before that. I just finished college, and I was thinking about doing my advanced studies in engineering, get an engineering degree, and somehow I felt drawn to life of ministry, and I thought, well, be a pastor. So apparently I wasn't the only one. About 300 of us came that year to Zaoksky, and as I mentioned, there was only 50 spots available. So how you choose 1 out of 6, and that's the task, and the seminary faculty set up the exam. So you had to take a written exam, you had to have an interview, and also you had to preach a sermon. I became a Christian. I was baptized just a year before that. So some of the people that came with me were born and raised Adventists. And for them, they were pastors' children, conference president children, so for them, sermon was not a big deal. But for me, I was just absolutely petrified of speaking in front of people. So the setting was, and that will explain to you why sometimes I kind of look at Jim kind of strange. I'll tell you why. So I will never forget, I will never erase it from my memory. I've been scarred for life. So this is the entrance exam. There's the entire faculty and about 300 the applicants, and also about 100 already students in the seminary. So there's like 400 people sitting and watching, but their admissions committee, they're sitting on the side. So when I got up to preach, somebody lowered the pulpit. The person who preached before me was apparently not as tall, so they lowered the pulpit. And I put my notes in there, and I was wearing a different kind of glasses at the time, and those who were the glasses to see the distance, nearsightedness, right? So I looked down and I realized that maybe I was just nervous. I realized I don't see any of my notes. What do you need to do? I bent my knees so I can see it better. But I was still okay because the pulpit was in front of me. I said, I'll keep going. And as I started speaking, the nervousness gave in. And all of a sudden, what supposed to be a sermon, entrance exam sermon, turned out to be an entry-level dance lesson. Because I started doing this. But you couldn't tell because the pulpit is here. Except when I look to the side, the admissions committee, they all see this going. And they could not even listen to the word I was saying because they're all like laying down laughing or hiding their smiles. I looked at them and down, it was just getting worse and worse. Fear of public speaking is a number 1 fear in America. Can you guess what's the number 2? Death. That was quick. You know what that means, as one of the comedians once said, so at your own funeral, you would rather be in the casket than in the pulpit. Fear is a big thing. Fear is something that we've learned certainly last year, that all of us affected in one of the most common shared qualities. And In fact, someone say to be human is to be afraid. And all of us deal with the fears. We try to hide our fears. We hide it behind the sort of the machiness that we develop. We try to build the castles or fences around ourselves. When you see somebody is living in, try to deal with the fears through the accumulating wealth. Sometimes we just want to hide even behind our beliefs in our churches and our religions. We choose the religion so we think it's going to prevent us from being afraid. People want to choose the right church to do the right things, so they feel that's what protects them. But our belief systems, in our wealth, in our education, in our careers, in the fences or the fast cars or whatever we decide to hide our fears, it's not going to do that. We all keep our little fears, our little knee-shaking dances, we all keep them inside. And when we look around, we all realize we're all sitting here, all looking smile. By the way, this is such a good look. I mean, all the dresses, all the smiles. This is so good to see everyone. But if we look around as we greet one another, I can guarantee you that everyone inside is doing this. Not because you asked to preach, but there are other areas in your life. It can be health, it can be relationship, it can be finances, it can be children. Whatever it is in our lives, every one of us deals with fears on a daily basis. Many fears in our lives. The different names. People are afraid of all kinds of names, and I always love to go the list of the different kind of phobias, they call them. The phobia of spider, there's the phobia of color purple. My favorite is the phobia of phobia. This is the fears that we deal with, and we say, why is it such a reality in our lives? All these things, all this, they really kind of reduce and change the quality of life. Why do we have to deal with this? And the answer simply comes from a simple fact that the greatest fear that drives all our fears is actually the fear that somebody mentioned, number one fear. It's a fear of death. We perceive it as a number two fear, but in reality, all of us constantly deal with the reality of death. From the very time when we're born, all the way our last days, we constantly deal. Psychologists tell us some of it, psychologists never agree on anything. You know, you have 3 psychologists in a room and you have 5 opinions about things. But the fear seems to be such a dominant part of our lives and plays a dominant role in our lives. It's the fear of death. As soon as we realize our mortality, it affects the way we look at things. And even it affects the way we are. And that fear, and this is where the dangerous part comes, that fear starts shaping our characters. The insecurities, the aggressions, the anger that comes, if we dig deep enough, we'll find fear somewhere in there. The easiest example that comes to my mind is from the beginning of the book of Genesis, chapter 3. Remember when Adam and Eve in the garden, everything is beautiful. There's the garden of there's a tree of knowledge, and God says, don't touch it, don't do. And Adam and Eve have different thoughts on that. They approach the tree, taste the fruit, blame each other, and it's all of that happening. But what's happening afterwards is particularly interesting to me, because when God comes and looks for the human beings, looks for Adam and Eve, what do? They hide. And God asks, why did you hide? And Adam replied, I heard your sound in the garden. It can be a whole new sermon about the sound of God. What did Adam hear? I heard your sound, God, in the garden. Whatever that sound is, you cannot convince me that it was a scary sound. I want to believe that it was the sound of the Holy Spirit gently blowing through the garden, and touching the leaves, licking the blossoms. And this is what Adam heard. He heard that sound. I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. I was afraid. One of the first conversation, or the first conversation that God and human beings had after the fall began with the phrase, I was afraid. I was in fear. I was petrified. And unfortunately, it became part of our lives that we carry this. And no one is protected. No one can avoid it. Fear is dangerous. FDR, in his election campaign in 1933, famously said that the only fear, and we have nothing to fear but the fear itself. This is the words of Michel Montaigne, or British sociologists and philosophers, for instance, Bacon, American writer David Thoreau. Fear is the most dangerous thing that exists in our lives. We don't like to talk about fears because it makes us vulnerable. It reveals the part that we want to try to keep hidden, just like Adam tried to keep hidden himself, not to show up, so to speak, naked. And there are two kinds of people that I believe in this world: those who are afraid and those who are not honest about it. Everybody is afraid. We hide our fears, and we do pretty good jobs. We use different things and different means. And normally when the things are okay and under control, we're doing a pretty good job. But something happens like what we experienced last year. When we're shaken, when the status quo, when we are when our balance is off, this disequilibrium of life changes everything, and now the worst comes out. All of a sudden, we start moved, not even by who we are, and some things we do that we even not particularly like in ourselves. And we say, where does that come from? And I don't know if you've been in situations like this. I maybe not too much to reveal, but I have to catch myself that this microaggression things happen in life. I haven't been in this situation. It's a very simple thing, but this is the good example. When somebody cuts you on the freeway and you push your brake, and then they speed up, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Well, all of that, but I say it in Russian, so God doesn't hear it. But my thought always is, I hope there's a cop in front that will catch the guy. Yeah? But that's fear speaking. Because I am scared, because I am intimidated, because I'm frustrated, I want it projected somehow. And all of a sudden, my fears bring out the aggression, bring out anger, brings out insecurity, brings out manipulation. And we try to do whatever we possibly humanly can, deal with those things. And why do we strive? Why do we want to control the situation? Why do we want to have power? Why do people give so much to have power? Why a lot of conflicts that we have deal with the issues of power and struggle, who has the control? It's because of these little fears that's sitting inside of us. And they motivate, they start moving. How do we deal with fears? Psychologists tell us that there are basically two ways you can approach fear. One way, as I mentioned before, and we try to hide it. We try to get ourselves busy or distracted. But again, it's there. And if we don't deal with this, sooner or later it comes out. It comes in a situation when we don't expect, and what I've learned in my life, it comes the worst possible time. But the second way of dealing with fears is not the aggression, is not the hiding. It is the ability to look at fear and approach it and embrace it in such a way that it helps us to look at it as adventure. us venturing into something unknown. Instead of fighting for power, instead of becoming the aggressive person, we look at it and see where is it going to take us. This is the way of adventure. This is the way of describing. In other words, instead of hiding behind something or trying to hide those fears and suppress those fears inside, we're invited to grab a pair of spiritual sneakers or a bicycle, jump in the car, ride a donkey, board a plane, get on a boat, but we invited to go somewhere. We invited to take a step. So fear is, the only way to deal with the fear is to go and treat it as an adventure. Somehow, I don't know if it's true, but it's my subjective experience, and in my family, one of the greatest times we have is when we travel. And I discover myself that when I travel, somehow I'm a much braver person than normally, because you're activated to think on your feet, you make decisions. When you're relaxed at home and something happens, all of a sudden you kind of shaking. But when you travel, you expect the worst and you prepare yourself and you're ready to do it. A couple years ago, we traveled to Europe, and we had a layover in Amsterdam, about 8 hours. So Fletcher and I, Rita and Julie were flying another. I think they were going back later, so we had to take an earlier flight. And we had the layover in Amsterdam. So what we did is we hopped on a train from the airport, ran downtown Amsterdam, took a walk, went to a restaurant, not a cafe. Don't go, when you're in Amsterdam, don't go to a cafe. If you ask for directions, don't ask where's the closest cafe. He's laughing. Because when you go to a cafe in Amsterdam, they'll give you a menu. You're going to see on the menu things that now legal in California, but you don't want to use or take. So cafes in Amsterdam, a different thing. And I can tell, because as you walk the streets of Amsterdam, you can know yours. So we went to a restaurant. Of course, we had to go to a bike shop. You're in Europe, you're in Amsterdam. And then, if you're in Amsterdam, we rented bicycles. We rode around Amsterdam, rode all the way to Van Gogh Museum, then came back, then jumped on a boat and took a tour around the canals, under the bridges, went to the Jewish quarters, and saw a museum of purses. So there's such thing. I don't know if you can go to a museum to look at purses. So that sounds like fun, right? But then we went back. We had only about 5 minutes to board the train back to the airport, and we made it by about 5 minutes. And right now, when I think about it, how stupid was that? We almost missed the plane by 5 minutes. You know what I was thinking at the time? Oh gosh, we have 5 more minutes. What can we do in this 5 minutes? Because when we travel, when we take life as an adventure, something happens to us. Something activates. The steps and adventures, they not only involve the places, they also involve people. Some of the greatest adventures, so to speak, in my life were not necessarily places, but people. 5 years ago, when I became a pastor in La Sierra area, one of the first things we did, we went on a homeless count. We call them Friends Without Homes, because basically every year the county of Riverside goes around the county and they count the people on the streets. Basically, you approach people early in the morning. We go about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we see those who spend the night on the street, and we try to count how many. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, for the last 5 years, the number is going up and up and up and up. Homelessness is a huge crisis in America, and it's gonna just get worse and worse. So when we went down there, and usually now I'm supposed to come to people and ask them questions and interview them and make sure that we know who they are, where they're from, why they're not, how many years they spend on the street, and so forth. And normally this is not the people that you would naturally want to go and talk to, for a number of reasons. Smell, look, they're not adequately behaving. At times they're scary. And normally when you see somebody like this, panhandlers on the street. You might want to just give something and run away as quickly as possible. But now I had to look the people in the eyes. Overcoming that natural fear and insecurity, I have to look people in the eyes. And I don't know what it was, the day and the sun just slowly rising, as the few beautiful sunbeams just going across. And all of a sudden, when you get close enough, and no matter how scary a person looks, if you're just able to dismiss all of that and look in the eyes, the scariest person's eyes are always beautiful. And I discovered that I can just see in the eyes, and there were the stories that's coming up, the stories of where people come from. Another young man we picked up behind the Max's food store in downtown Riverside. He looked like he was a wild wolf, just standing the eyes. And I don't know, because he was already just shaken because he needed drugs or what was wrong with him. Aggressive looking, the fist clenched. And we invited him to sit in the van, and he said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm really cold." I said, "Okay, let me ask you a couple questions." I pulled out the pen, took the cup of the pen, looked up at him, and he was gone, asleep. The moment he felt safe, he fell asleep because he stayed up, tried to. So his aggression, his sort of that wild look was because he tried to protect himself. And as soon as he felt safe, he fell asleep, and we let him sleep a little bit. You discover amazing things when we start overcoming our natural fears. And I think this is where our text stands up today, because we realize that there's two ways to live: living out of fear and living despite fear, overcoming fear. As I say, well, it sounds a little philosophical. The best way I've learned to demonstrate that, it's actually the difference between an optimist and pessimist. You know the difference? Yeah, they're optimists, pessimists, and they're Russians, but that's a different story. So the story that I always love to tell, the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. I don't know if I shared with someone here. I think I did, right? Did I share that story with you? So there's this scientists wanted to do an experiment, and they took a lovely young children, just like the ones we saw for children's story today. And one boy who was on the pessimistic side, they put him in a room full of toys. And then there's a little girl, just all wild hair, all over jumping up and down. You could not sit her. And they put her in a room where there was nothing but the pile of manure. And they decided to check on them in about an hour. They come in, and the boy was sitting among all these beautiful, expensive toys, just crying. I said, "What happened? Why are you crying?" I said, "Well, all these toys are so beautiful. I'm afraid to touch them, that I'll break them. So I'm so upset." They come in the room with the little girl, and she's just there with a little shovel just going through that manure. It's like, "What are you doing?" He said, "You know, there's so much manure here, there's got to be a pony somewhere in here." Are we living out of fear? Are we living despite fear? And a life in a year like this, like we had in 2020, and in some ways we just hear the echoes of 2020 again, here again and again. It feels like 2020 is not over quite yet. And we all really want it, but there's been so much manure, there's got to be a blessing somewhere in all of this. And we're yet to discover. But for that, we need to take an action. And the action that the author of this letter, the First John, suggests to us is not what we do, but something that was done for us. Remember this line. This is how we know love. Jesus laid down his life for us. The greatest fears that we deal with, the fear of death, is gone. We don't have to be afraid anymore. But what's remarkable in this text, that the opposite of fear becomes, of course, courage. But courage is an interesting word in English. Some of your translations translate the text a little different. Not be courageous, but they'll translate this text as take heart. And why? Because the word courage comes from a Latin core, and the same word in English that we have that also comes from the same root is the word cardio, or cardiologist, is the word heart. Courage and heart are the same things. To be courageous, to have a strong heart. But the heart also responsible for another feeling, because heart is the source of love. So love and courage somehow play together. You say, well, it sounds a little bit thin here, those of us who are Bible students. But down in the 1 John, in chapter 4, verse 18, we found these words. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear expects punishment. The person who is afraid has not been made perfect in love. In other words, it says if we don't discover that redemption, if we don't discover that freedom that Jesus is giving us, we're never going to be able to understand the depth that can be discovered in love. So instead of living out of fear, we can ask a question, take it as an adventure, as an exploration. No matter what vehicle you want to travel with, one becomes absolutely important for us. There is no way to discover freedom. There's no way to discover the full colors, the enjoyment and beauty of life without love. So what kind of action we need to take when we talk about or confronting our fears? We ask a simple question. Is somebody in our lives, and it can be circumstances, relationships, is something really makes us afraid? If we start going into this knee-shaking dance, look and say, where is love here? Who is loving whom? Because God, who is present everywhere, is present in the moment. Whom can I love in this moment? Who loves me in this moment? And how can God's love can be manifested in this moment? Imagine the conflicts, tensions, struggles in our lives that can be avoided if we ask these simple questions. Who is loving who in this moment? Who is loving me? Who am I loving in this moment? Where is God? Where is God's love at this moment in my life, in my circumstances? This is the adventure that we're invited to. I thought it was kind of cool that in English the word courage and heart are kind of related, until I discovered Hebrew. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Be strong, be fearless, don't be afraid, and don't be scared by your enemies, because the Lord your God is the one who marches with you. He won't let you down, and He won't abandon you. The Hebrew word for courage is, my Hebrew is not good, so if anybody has a better way to pronounce this, I want to say amatz. Hebrew word for courage is amatz. Can we say amatz together? Amatz. Amatz. The Hebrew word for willingness to take action, the same root. So the courage is willingness to take action, to do something. Another Hebrew word that is a little different beginning, mametz. Can we say mametz? So courage is ametz. Mametz is effort. You're only courageous if you're actually making an effort. You cannot be doing nothing. You cannot be passive and be courageous. The only way to overcome fear is to put something in action. And what is that action? John makes it very clear. Little children, let's not laugh with words or speech, but with action and truth. According to 1 John, the recipe for bravery is the action, but not any action. The specific steps of love, intentional love, and finding the moments and appreciating and reflecting on what it means to love somebody and how your love or love of someone toward you changes you. I don't want to spend too much time. We're going to have, I'm sure, days and years to share. But I want a little bit about my conversion story. This has been the 30-year anniversary, so it's exactly 30 years ago I started going to church. And I have to tell you, again, the story that of many young people who grew up in the Soviet Union at the break of the Soviet Union. Imagine one day you wake up and everything you were told about your past happened to be absolute lie. You're living in the lies, and you understand now things that are not true or distorted, and you understand that what happened now is in the past is now has to be changed or revisited. But even worse, what's even worse for a young person, your future is completely unknown, unclear, and no one is going to be there for you for your future because the world just falling apart. So a lot of people my age start reading philosophical books, and of course, if it's Russia, there's no philosophy without using a certain beverages that puts you in a more philosophical mode. I started drinking when I was at the age of 14. By the age of 17, I was probably drunk 3-4 times a week. Just to deal with all the stress, because your body, you cannot take so much. You start self-medicating with all this stuff. I started smoking when I was 12. Smoking was part of a kind of diet because you're constantly hungry as a teenager. So what you do is you use cigarettes as appetite suppression. So a lot of people were smoking. So that was our life. So you deal with all of those things in one day. After I was the best man at the wedding, Russian weddings go like for 3 days. First 2 days I don't remember it all for obvious reasons. And the third day I came home after all of this and I felt so empty, just exhausted. And I looked in front of me. I was sitting in my room, but in front of me was just darkness and emptiness. And we often afraid of something scary. But I discovered that the greatest fear that I've experienced was the fear of nothingness, of emptiness. So I called my friend and says, I heard you going to church. I'll tell you that story. It's a miracle itself, how he ended up being a Seventh-day Adventist. I said, please take me to church with you. I just need to go. And that's how it started. It was the spring of 1999. Believe it or not, I used to have hair. And a lot of it. It was, David, I had the hair just like Daniel right there. I had exactly the same hair. So I didn't particularly like it because it would take time to style it. So I would shave, and I would shave a little mohawk inside, so I wanted to look cool. My favorite color is black. So I would have the mohawk and a pack of cigarettes, and I was ready to go. That was my first visit to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Anything I looked, thank you, Sherry. Anything I looked was opposite of the people were there. Dear saints who went through communism, persecution by faith, their children were taken because of keeping the Sabbath. All of this, and here comes this man that smells like cigarettes, looks kind of mean, wearing all black. I would go between the Sabbath school and the church. I would step outside, and I would be standing and smoking a cigarette because that's what you do. And they would surround me and start talking to me. Nobody said anything, put down the cigarette. They were just talking. And somehow that relationship, that love that I started feeling, I wasn't thinking much about God. I just felt that every week I want to be with the people who simply accepted me how I was and loved me for what I was. And trust me, there was not much to work with. But somehow they were able to do it. I was still in college, and one day I had to go on a project on Saturday, and I knew it was Sabbath. I knew I was not supposed to do it. I said, hey, I need to do it. The deadline is approaching. And as I was working on my project, I looked in the window, and I saw the youth group from the church coming through to my door, to my apartment. They run the bell and say, hey, we have a youth program this afternoon on Sabbath. Why don't you come with us? No judgment, no accusations like, what are you doing on Sabbath? None of that. We missed you, come with us. 30 years later, I'm standing in front of you. Love overcomes fears. And this is how we know that we love. When we put our fears, we overcome with action. And that action is love. When we are insecure, when we are frustrated, when we are afraid, somewhere behind all of this, there is fears. But we know that the way to overcome fear is not even our work. And this is the good news. This is why we're Christians. Because Jesus gives us His courage, His ability to love, and we accept it as a gift. Because in the moment, in the worst possible moments, with the people that you would care the less about, even in that moment we realize that God, Jesus loves that person and you exactly the same way. So when someone upsets us, when someone frustrates us, we realize that we share exactly the same love. Someone had a beautiful definition of idolatry. Anne Lamott, who is a great prolific Christian writer, she's quirky and fun. If you'd like to read good solid Christian things, sometimes she uses strong language, and her political preferences is questionable. But Anne Lamott has this beautiful line who says, when your God starts hating the same people you do, you just created an idol. Because our God loves the people we hate. And just to wrap our mind in that, and all of a sudden when we realize that we are experiencing God's love not only for ourselves, but in others, all of a sudden our fears start being elevated and we become freer because we realize this is not our job to defend God. We don't have to struggle. We don't have to fight because God is taking care of this. Our job is to love. The greatest commandment in chapter 3 tells us is this. This is His commandment, that we believe in the name of His Son, Jesus Christ, and we love each other as He commanded us. I'm standing here. This is third or fourth Sabbath? Gosh, I already. When you're having time, when you're having fun, time flies. When I first time sneaked in here, I remember I was thinking and sitting in the back, what is our future here in San Marcos? What is our future individually, our families, our children? A beautiful, beautiful children group. What is our future as a community, as a church? And the answer is really simple. Are we going to live in fear? Are we going to live practicing love? Are we going to put love in action? And I don't know how it's going to go, but I know where we need to begin. So let's go together. Let the journey begin. Let's love. Amen.